Hare Krishna devotees. Today we are going to read the continuation of the book Coming Back Science of Reincarnation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. I will start from the topic The Modern Age. As we enter the 20th century, we find the idea of reincarnation attracting the mind of one of the West's most influential artists, Paul Gauguin, who during his final years in Tahiti wrote that when the physical organism breaks up, the soul survives. It then takes on another body. Gauguin wrote, degrading or elevating according to merit or demerit. The artist believed that the idea of continued rebirth had first been taught in the West by Pythagoras, who learned it from the sages of ancient India. US auto magnate Henry Ford once told a newspaper interviewer, I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26. Ford said, genius is experience. Some seem to think that it is a gift or a talent, but it is the fruit of long experience in many lives. In a similar fashion, US General George S. Patton believed that he had acquired his military skills on ancient battlefields. Reincarnation is a recurring theme in Ulysses by Irish novelist and poet James Joyce. In one famous passage in this novel, Joyce's hero, Mr. Bloom, tells his wife, some people believe that we go on living in another body after death, that we lived before. They call it reincarnation. That we all lived before on the earth thousands of years ago or on some other planet. They say we have forgotten it. Some say they remember their past lives. Jack London made reincarnation the major theme of his novel, The Star Rover, in which the central character says, I did not begin when I was born, nor when I was conceived. I have been growing, developing through incalculable myriads of millenniums. All my previous selves have their voices, echoes, promptings in me. Oh, incalculable times again shall I be born, and yet the stupid dolls about me think that by stretching my neck with a rope they will make me cease. In his classic novel of the search for spiritual truth, Siddhartha Nobel laureate Hermann Hesse wrote, he saw all these forms and faces in a thousand relationships to each other. None of them died, they only changed, were always reborn, continually had a new face. Only time stood between one face and another. Numerous scientists and psychologists have believed in reincarnation as well. One of the greatest modern psychologists, Carl Jung, used the concept of an eternal self that undergoes many births as a tool in his attempts to understand the deepest mysteries of the self and consciousness. I could well imagine that I might live in a former centuries and there encountered questions I was not yet able to answer, that I had to be born again because I had not fulfilled a task that was given to me, Jung said. British biologist Thomas Huxley noted that the doctrine of transmigration was a means of constructing a plausible vindication of the ways of the cosmos to man, and warned that none but very hasty thinkers will reject it on the ground of inherent absurdity. One of the leading figures in the field of psychoanalysis and human development, American psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, is convinced that reincarnation goes to the very core of every man's belief system. Let us face it, deep down, nobody in his right mind can visualize his own existence without assuming that he has always lived and will live hereafter, the author wrote. Mahatma Gandhi, one of the greatest political figures of modern times, an apostle of nonviolence, once explained how a practical understanding of reincarnation gave him hope for his dream of world peace. Gandhi said, I cannot think of permanent enmity between man, and believing as I do in the theory of rebirth, I live in the hope that if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all of humanity in friendly embrace. In one of his most famous short stories, J.D. Salinger introduces Teddy, a preconscious young boy who recalls his reincarnation experiences and speaks forthrightly about them. It's so silly. All you do is get the heck out of your body when you die. My gosh, everybody's done it thousands of times. Just because they don't remember, it doesn't mean they haven't done it. Jonathan Livingstone Seagull, hero of the novel by the same name, whom author Richard Bach described as that brilliant little fire that burns within us all, goes through a series of reincarnation that lead him from earth to the heavenly world and back again to enlighten the less fortunate gulls. One of Jonathan's mentors inquires, do you have any idea how many lives we must have gone through before even got the first idea that there is more to life than eating or fighting or power in the flock? 1,000 lives, John, 10,000, and then another 100 lives until we began to learn that there is such a thing as perfection, and another 100 again to get the idea that our purpose for living is to find that perfection and show it forth. Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer often speaks of past lives, rebirth, and the immortality of the soul in his masterful short stories. There is no death. How can there be death if everything is part of the Godhead? The soul never dies and the body is never really alive. And British poet laureate John Masefield, in his well known poem about past and future lives, writes, and I quote, I hold that when a person dies, his soul returns again to earth. Arrayed in some new flesh disguise, another mother gives him birth. With sturdier limbs and brighter brain, the old soul takes the road again. Unquote. Musician, songwriter, and celebrated ex Beatle George Harrison, serious thinking about reincarnation is revealed in his private thoughts of interpersonal relationships. Friends are all souls that we have known in other lives. We are drawn to each other. That's how I feel about friends. Even if I have only known them a day, it doesn't matter. I am not going to wait till I have known them for 2 years. Because anyway, we must have met somewhere before. Reincarnation is once again attracting the minds of intellectuals and the general public in the West. Films, novels, popular songs, and periodicals now treat reincarnation with ever increasing frequency, and millions of Westerners are rapidly joining ranks with the more than 1.5 billion people, including Hindus, Buddhists, Theos, and members of other faiths, who have traditionally understood that life does not begin at birth nor end with death. But simple curiosity or belief is not sufficient. It is merely the first step in understanding the complete science of reincarnation, which includes knowledge of how to free oneself from the miserable cycles of birth and death. Bhagavad Gita, the timeless source book on reincarnation. Many Westerners, in order to gain a deeper understanding about reincarnation, are turning to the original sources of knowledge about past and future lives. Among all available literatures, the Sanskrit Vedas of India are the oldest on earth and the present the most comprehensive and logical explanations of the science of reincarnation, teachings that have maintained their viability and universal appeal for more than 5,000 years. The most fundamental information about reincarnation appears in Bhagavad Gita, the essence of the Upanishads and of all Vedic knowledge. The Gita was spoken 50 centuries ago by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to his friend and disciple Arjun on a battlefield in northern India. A battlefield is the perfect place for a discussion about reincarnation, for in combat man directly confront the faithful questions of life, death, and the afterlife. As Krishna begins to speak on the immortality of the soul, he tells Arjun, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be." The Gita further instructs that which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. The soul, here we speak of something so subtle that it is not immediately verifiable by a limited human mind and senses. Therefore, not everyone will be able to accept the existence of the soul. Krishna informs Arjun, some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. Accepting the existence of the soul is, however, not merely a matter of faith. Bhagavad Gita appeals to the evidence of our senses and logic, so we may accept its teachings with some degree of rational conviction and not blindly as dogma. It is impossible to understand reincarnation unless one knows the difference between the actual self, the soul, and the body. The Gita helps us see the nature of the soul by the following example. As the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity. One within the body illuminates the entire body by consciousness. Consciousness is concrete evidence of the presence of the soul within the body. On a cloudy day, the sun may not be visible, but we know it is there in the sky by the presence of the sunlight. Similarly, we may not be able to directly perceive the soul, but we may conclude it is there by the presence of consciousness. In the absence of consciousness, the body is simply a lump of dead matter. Only the presence of consciousness makes the lump of dead matter breathe, speak, love, and fear. In essence, the body is a vehicle for the soul, through which it may fulfill its myriad material desires. The Gita explains that the living entity within the body is seated as on a machine made of the material energy. The soul falsely identifies with the body, carrying its different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Just as an automobile cannot function without the presence of a driver, the material body cannot function without the presence of the soul. As one grows older, the distinction between the conscious self and the physical body becomes more obvious. Within his lifetime, a person can observe that his body is constantly changing. It does not endure, and the time proves the child ephemeral. The body comes into existence at a certain time, grows, matures, produces byproducts, that's the children, and gradually dwindles and dies. The physical body is thus unreal, for it will, in due time, disappear. As the Gita explains, of the non existence there is no endurance. But despite of all the changes of the material body, consciousness is a symptom of soul within remains unchanged. Of the eternal there is no change. Therefore, we may logically conclude that consciousness possesses an innate quality of permanence that enables it to survive the dissolution of the body. Krishna tells Arjun, for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He is not slain when the body is slain. But if the soul is not slain when the body is slain, then what becomes of it? The answer given in the Bhagavad Gita is that the soul enters another body. This is reincarnation. This concept may be difficult for some people to accept, but it is a natural phenomenon, and the Gita gives logical examples to aid our understanding. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth, to old age. The soul simply passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. In other words, man reincarnates even in the course of one lifetime. Any biologist will tell you that the body's cells are constantly dying and being replaced by new ones. In other words, each of us has a number of different bodies in this very life. The body of an adult is completely different from the body the same person had as an infant. Yet, despite bodily changes, the person which within remains the same. Something similar happens at the time of death. The self undergoes a final change of body. The Gita says, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and the useless ones. Thus, the soul remains entrapped in an endless cycle of birth and death. One who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after death, one is sure to take birth again, the Lord tells Arjuna. According to the Vedas, there are 84 leg species of life, beginning with the microbes, rising through the fish, plants, insects, reptiles, birds, animals, to the humans and demigods. According to their desires, the living entities perpetually take birth in these species. The mind is a mechanism that directs this transmigration, propelling the soul to newer and newer bodies. The Gita explains whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail in his next life. Everything we have thought and done during our life makes an impression on the mind, and the sum total of all these impressions influences our final thoughts at death. According to the quality of these thoughts, material nature awards us a suitable body. Therefore, the type of the body that we have now is the expression of our consciousness at the time of our last death. The living entity thus takes another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He then enjoys a particular set of sense objects. The Gita explains. Further, the path of reincarnation does not always lead uphill. The human being is not guaranteed a human birth in his next life. For example, if one dies with the mentality of a dog, then he will in his next life receive the eyes, ears, nose, etc. of a dog, thus allowing him to enjoy canine pleasures. Lord Krishna confirms the fate of such an unfortunate soul, saying, when one dies in the mode of ignorance, he takes birth in the animal kingdom. According to Bhagavad Gita, humans who do not inquire about their non physical higher nature are compelled by the laws of karma to continue in the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, sometimes appearing as humans, sometimes as animals, and sometimes as plants or insects. Our existence in the material world is due to the multiple karmic reactions of this and previous lives, and the human body provides the only loophole through which the materially conditioned soul can escape. By properly utilizing the human form, one can solve all the problems of life, that is, birth, death, disease, and old age, and break the endless cycle of reincarnation. If, however, a soul having evolved to the human platform wastes his life by engaging only in activities for sense pleasure, he can easily create sufficient karma in this present life to keep him entangled in the cycle of birth and death for thousands upon thousands of lives, and they may not all be human. Lord Krishna says, the foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. The enduring transcendentalists who are situated in self realization can see all this clearly. But those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try to. A soul fortunate enough to obtain a human body should seriously endure for self realization, to understand the principles of reincarnation and become free from repeated birth and death. We can't afford not to. Hare Krishna.